There's something wonderful about a fresh snowfall, and this week we got a huge dump of just gorgeous powdery flakes, and it inspired me to create something winter themed. Hi, I'm Lara Watley and welcome back to my studio. So first, when I'm approaching a creature, I will often look to nature for an inspiration and then get into my studio, and honestly it starts with the clay. It almost always starts with the clay. I will sometimes have a semi-formed idea in my head, but often I like to see just how things start moving as I play with the clay itself. Now, this creature, I had attempted a shape last year that I really liked, and that's these guys, so I wanted to use that as a basis for the inspiration, but then really push that idea further. Any work with polymer clay, of course, begins with conditioning, and that's what I'm doing here, and that helps limit air bubbles and moonies later on when you bake it. And at this part too, I'm just making sure the clay is warm and malleable to make my job easier later on. And once it's conditioned, I can get ahead and start properly bringing this thing to life. This stage, the sculpting stage, feels most intuitive to me as an artist, and honestly, it's the space I spend the most time on. I'm looking to try and bring together a form that suggests character and life and uniqueness, and so I'll spend a long time with just the basic shapes and make sure they're translating correctly before going on to details. For this guy, fairly simple design. We're making seals, and they are round and roly-poly and quite cute, so I was trying to make sure that my shapes were really getting that message across before I added details like their fins and flippers. And this guy, he's kind of sitting back with his arms or flippers to support him, and I often use this handy silicone shaper for attaching pieces. If you really want good strength, it's a good idea to use Bake and Bond, but here, since the clay was warm and well conditioned, I just went ahead and attached the two pieces manually. And at this stage in sculpting, we're really trying to make sure that weight makes sense as well. So it looks like if they're supporting themselves by their arms, it looks like there's weight up into their shoulders, just like an actual being who might be sitting leaning back on their hands like that. And so I'm really considering quite a lot and translating movement, motion, and character into very simple forms. And at this stage, I was pretty happy with how he was looking, so I went ahead and made the spot for the eyes using my ball stylus. And these days, I use glass beads for the eyes. It just makes things a whole lot simpler. But positioning for the eyes is really important. It changes the character of a piece, and even spacing between them, how large they are in the head, and how they kind of sit, including what the cheekbones look like, will completely change how your character is perceived and the personality of it. So I spend a lot of time here making sure that I'm happy with the face and happy with how things are coming through before actually putting the eyes in. And I will say, polymer clay is always collecting dust. Okay, the eyes go in, and once again I just make sure they're sitting correctly, and that at this stage the face is giving me the kind of character that I'm looking for. Each of my pieces I want to have a lot of personality, and so I really spend a lot of time here, and their face is most of where the character translates through. Position, pose, all of that is also very important, but a lot can be said in expression, and so I spend a while here. I ended up giving him little eyebrows, and I thought it added a little character. And there we go. There's the shape, and we are ready to move on to the next stage. One of my favorite ways for getting a soft look on PolymerClay is to use pastels. And so that's what I'm doing here, just dabbing on a little bit of gray and sort of using a mottled technique to get the spots that are pretty characteristic on seals. So this guy will be a fully grown seal. They tend to be gray and spotted with a white belly, whereas the other 3 seals that I also added are going to be pups, and they will be mostly white with dark noses. Now, as you can see, it layers on very nicely, and once it bakes, it sets into the clay itself. It gives a kind of neat faded and airbrushed look without the hard lines of acrylics. I also build up some of those spots, taking my time and making sure the tones are even. And at this point, the seals go into the oven, and so I take a bit of a content break and start editing the video that you're watching right now and the process that I've done so far. Video editing, I will say, takes forever. That's still something I'm getting used to, but that's the way it goes. Here is the seal baked, and then we just have one more step. I wasn't convinced at first about whether or not I wanted to do this bit, but I did end up deciding to blush up the white parts of my seal a little bit more using acrylics. And so here I am just painting in a little bit of watered down acrylics over the spots that I want to be more white, and then blending in those spaces with a soft sponge to make sure there aren't any harsh edges and nothing is sitting or pooling in the creases too much. And honestly, the neat thing about painting white over a dark color is it gives you that kind of velvety look, which works out really well for seals because they naturally have that effect in their fur, as the tips of their fur tend to be a lighter white color anyways over their darker base tones. So this works really well for this creature, and I end up being very happy that I decided to go this route instead of just leaving them the solid 2-tone gray. And while I'm painting, I'm really not being precious with the process. I'm just throwing paint on there and then dabbing it off as quickly as I can so that I can get that smooth and velvety look before the paint starts to dry. The critical bit here is definitely making sure there are no harsh lines or paint pooling in creases that we don't want it to, so that it just goes on very evenly. This process probably would be made easier with an airbrush, which I'm hoping to get set up in my studio soon, but for now this works just fine, and using a sponge to smooth out everything does the trick. Because this process takes so long, just painting on paint and then dabbing it off again and over building up the layers, I honestly, when making these seals in the future, will probably start with a whiter clay just to have a brighter base to work on, and then if I do still want that velvety effect over the grays, I might either only do a couple layers of acrylic or else just brush white pastel right over top of the gray pastel to kind of get that same effect. But I did appreciate the control that the paint gave me for building up those spots, and here finally just painting on a whole layer of white. So I was really loving the velvety grays that were coming through when they were covered with the white. So again, just really roughly getting it on there as fast as I could before the paint dried, and then dabbing it off again before it started to set. I'm not quite sure what it is, but seals as a subject always interested me, and I think, honestly, despite the pain of painting them, it might be their dusty blue and gray tones, and actually, you know what, it might be because of the pain of painting them. There's something about a challenge that excites me as an artist, and I feel compelled to give it a go. And there's nothing quite like trying to capture paint tones that don't exactly translate too easily in acrylics, including those dusty blue grays and anything that is not quite as pigmented as the paints come in themselves. So this was a fun challenge, and the snow poured in the afternoon, and here we go. Here's the little seal sitting down watching the snow fall, and I am really happy with how these guys turned out. I made that him and 3 little buddies. As you can see, they're in the Seal Pup paint color. I like both versions, the adult spots and the more classic Harp Seal Pup look. And because it was so beautiful outside, I just had to take them out and do a quick photo shoot in the snow. I absolutely loved the process of bringing these guys to life, and I think they turned out really great. Even better than I had imagined when I thought about making seals. So I hope you enjoyed following along this process and seeing a sneak peek into my studio. See you next time.